My name is Nolan Hack. I am a black revolutionary from Los Angeles, California.
I'm Tanja Burkhard. I'm an Afro-German educator in Pittsburgh.
I'm John Kane. I am Ungwe. I am Gunyakaaga, otherwise known as Mohawk. I live in the Cattaraugus Territory of Seneca Nation, and I am an activist, radio host, and I host Let's Talk Native.
All right. Today, the topic at hand, I think it's timely with MLK's assassination. I don't like to use the word anniversary, but 50 years ago he was assassinated, April 4th. Putting our ancestors' teachings into practice. And as we were talking about before we hit the record button, we don't exactly do that in terms of the majority. We are quicker to be beholden to this genocidal system that our ancestors fought against, or before this system existed. We rebuke the teachings of our ancient ancestors who preach things like it doesn't, poor or rich, it's what's in the man's heart. Helping the poor, giving fortunes, giving your riches to somebody in need, like Mansa Musa, for example. Not taking more than you need, which is a huge practice by a lot of native societies here and as well as in Africa. So we need to definitely start listening to our ancestors more often, and more of us to do so. But I guess I'll start by asking fellow panelists, when you think of your ancestors, and for me, I include my own family members because that's the original meaning of the word ancestor. But when you think of our ancestors, what comes to mind in terms of wisdom that you use in your own life?
Well, I guess I don't mind going first. Well, the first thing that I have to do is I've got to parse it out, though, because, frankly, we were lied to by many of them. So the idea of trying to parse out what is wisdom and forward thinking versus when, especially after European contact, when our people started buying into some of the ideals that they set forth, and the whole idea of male domination and hierarchies and, taking all that the land will give to you and that kind of stuff. So that's part of the problem, because when you're talking about forgetting some of those teachings and adopting the practices of colonists, I mean, you've got to put religion in there, and that's a big part that is really infected or affected indigenous peoples and people of color in a big way. And they've used the very religions that they use to oppress us, many of our people have embraced. So, having said that, what I've got to do is I've got to look, because frankly, the ancestors can't speak to us anymore. They've long been gone. And what we're left with is trying to understand through the language, for one, what the language really meant and what went into creating the words and the phrases and the concepts that are captured in that language. And then realizing that those ancestors weren't trying to make a path for a forward path for us. They created a path that got them to their place. And what they wanted us to do was to look at the path that they had established, so it could be a model for the path that we need to go forward on. So for us, we've got to reach back into the past and bring that wisdom forward, understanding that wisdom was going to grow with each generation. I mean, what 7 generations knew versus 14 generations before was it got added to, and so it wasn't for us to say a stagnant people with a very specific set of ideals and philosophies and rules or regulations, but really to understand that those philosophies and those ideals were something that the people who came before us and the path that they made was a direction, and it was a path that went with nature, not against nature, and it was the whole idea of going forward with some of those ideals, understanding that we would grow as a people as we did.
I concur. I'll use a quote from Sojourner Truth to back that up. Truth is powerful and it prevails. Like that. I did not hear any lies from what John just said. Tanja, what about you? What comes to mind? And what do you look at when you look at the wisdom of your ancestors and how you put it forward in your own life?
I think, yeah, John put it so well that I don't have necessarily anything great to add other than that I second the idea of parsing out what is wisdom that is applicable to us and what is wisdom that was produced through colonial encounters and applicable for maybe that moment or that time. And I think that's sometimes kind of difficult to parse out. So just collectively trying to figure out what are those things that we really need to focus on that our ancestors were putting forth that we could continue or should continue. And I think for me, I mean, I talk about this like every week when we're doing these, but for me it is the relationship with the environment and the land and how we can disrupt the path that we're currently on, and really go into a direction that is respectful of our children and the future as well as ourselves, by respecting the earth that we're on and stopping to rape it. So I think it's, finding ways to do that in the current moment would be something that I would love to continue that was started by our ancestors, but is completely disrupted.
Well, that hope you talk about, Tanja, I look at South Africa right now and the change in the air. Like, you hear the word change in the United States, when I hear it, I want to throw up a lot of times because, like, maybe for y'all something's changing, but we're still over here getting beaten in the head. But like legitimate change is happening over there. We're reclaiming our land. We are punishing racism and not apologizing for it, and it's beautiful. And I hope that continues. And John, you brought up something about religion, and not to use the same woman, but she was pretty incredible, so I'll do so anyways. Sojourner Truth said, "Religion without humanity is very poor human stuff." And you look at Christianity, the Catholic faith, even the Jewish faith, and their warped versions of it, and what they have done to the two of us in certain factions. I would add warped version of Islam. They invaded Africa. They forced Islam extremism down our throats. And that we have, you look at Africa today, it's changed. It's the top, the top part of it is very Islamic. It's very, it's not what it used to look like. And I'm, believe in whatever faith you want, but a lot of the territory in North Africa was invaded and pillaged, and is not what it used to look like. Just like in Turtle Island, South America, Christianity has warfare into Christianity has completely changed the outlook of this land. But I think we have Illari on the call now.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah,
you are here.
Hello.
Well, we're talking about our ancestors and how we put our ancestors' teachings into practice. What are your thoughts on that topic?
I think, there's so many angles you could go about it, and sometimes if you say it that way, it might emphasize thinking about maybe what people would call religion. But I think for me, when you tell me that, I think of more the aspects of my ancestors' critical thinking skills. So let's say, like, living like them would be thinking of, all the genius inventions they did. Because if you think about it, to come up with some of the things they developed, you had to have a mind that would try to analyze, the universe, or, why are there stars kind of mentality, or how do we build things. You had to have a very analytical mind, right? That's what when you ask me that question, that's the stuff I think about. Because in today's day and age, I could implement that to improve our lives as indigenous people.
Well, and I agree. The critical thinking is just a major thing that gets tamped down and beaten down with this idea of conformity, especially by religion. And so when you work to eliminate critical thinking, then you cease to let a people continue down their evolutionary path of development. Part of that critical thinking isn't just the idea of advancing technology, but knowing what technologies shouldn't be abused and shouldn't be overused. When I look at some of the history of our people, clearly there was technology that was pursued in terms of everything from agriculture to building and all kinds of other things. But the reality is, we didn't go monocrop. We didn't go in the direction of things that would be detrimental to the earth. So, I still go back to this idea that more than a religious philosophy, our people really embraced a better understanding of the creation around them, and allowed a deeper understanding of natural law rather than man's law, or rather than religious constructs and that kind of stuff. Because rather than having to rely on what you were told or taught, or having somebody else interpret what a phrase or an expression or what various languages mean, nature can speak to you in your own language at any given time. It always does speak to you in that same way. So for me, that is still going to be the concept, the idea of applying, as Illari said, critical thinking to what you're observing, and rather than trying to eliminate through forced conformity and assimilation the killing of the creative spirit.
And just to add to that, the reason I brought it up was because a lot of the times, because as indigenous people, you're generalized. Sometimes you're thought of as people that kind of like more on like a hippie level, kind of embracing nature, but it wasn't that. It's like you're analyzing nature, and you're accepting that you're part of a larger circle, instead of like how we live now. We're not really part of nature. We're going against it in a way, because we're destroying everything around us. And I say we, it's mostly whoever controls everything. But so it's like very important, and I'm paraphrasing, but if I remember correctly. So it's like the American Society for the Advancement of Science has an article about indigenous people and their achievements in science and engineering. And there's a quote in it, and I'm going to paraphrase it, that says that contemporary scientists have difficulty understanding or how to split or how to actually remove or even understand the fusion of cosmological beliefs and the scientific principles in those cosmological beliefs. So this isn't really something that is spoken a lot, and it's also not something made up trying to kind of like rewrite history or anything like that or try to spin things. This is like a real thing that scholars and even, like I said, an association for the advancement of science sees.
And that does get lost all the time. What both of our ancestors did, as far as how advanced our societies were, in their mind of the populace, lack thereof, or science and education. And you look at both of our societies; we were right out in front compared to the rest of the world. I'm a broken record when I say this. The one thing white folks had on us was bloodlust. That's what they were ahead of. But there's so much to learn from both of our people and our ancestors, from what we were able to accomplish all those years ago. And you can see it kind of ripple to the young people today, black or indigenous, with some of the amazing things that they are doing. I think within the last week, it was a young black dude and a young black girl they got 18 to 20 different scholarships from countries all over from colleges all over the country. There is a native, young native dude who got into, I think it was 7 different colleges coming from the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is is poverty-stricken as much as any place on the planet. And just that type of excellence and that type of being able to succeed to that level is incredible, especially with the obstacles that we have to overcome. But just seeing, looking back at our ancestors and then kind of pointing right down to our young people, just like before and present day, connecting each other.
Well, and I think we have to be careful on how much we attribute academic achievement based on on somebody else's version of that, as we're attributing that to necessarily excellence. But I can appreciate achievement where achievement is stifled so much, and so I can appreciate that no matter what. One of the things that I think, and I got to go back to some of the reference that I made and then you made about religion. I look at these dominant religions of the planet, and we can say that they've been corrupted or they've been bastardized or they've taken versions of them. But if you parse those all out, you realize that all of them are embedded with some really crazy ideas that anybody who applies critical thinking can't reconcile. I think the opportunity that we have right now is that we have a younger generation that is not necessarily the situations have changed. The idea of trying to indoctrinate young people into religious beliefs has waned to a large extent. So, and I'm not saying that we have an entire generation of quote-unquote atheists or a label for them, but I don't think you've got a younger generation that is bound by these religious constructs as much. I mean, I know it changes from region to region, but I mean, I've seen it in South America where you've seen less impact of Catholicism that existed for generations amongst people of color, and you see it. You know, you see it clearly in the United States, and I'm not just talking about indigenous people. I'm talking about people in general. They're losing their religion, and I think that's a good thing because now we have a better opportunity to reach to people to ask them to apply critical thinking rather than the conformity of religion. So I think that is what kind of gives me hope. You know, not that I want people to be I don't know. I don't want to use words like godless or soulless, but I mean be without principles. But I don't think those religions necessarily. I don't think they accomplished the idea of setting principles for people. I think they did the opposite.
Well, would you say that the religions that were forced and still are forced down our throats don't accomplish that? But would you say that the faiths and religions that we practiced before white people did accomplish that and enriched our lives?
Wait, say that again. Are you asking me? Do I think those faiths enriched our lives?
Yeah, our original faiths and religions, both African and Native.
Well, you know, again, when we talk about our philosophies, what we have a tendency to do is try to set them side by side with religion and with faith. You know, faith is this idea of believing something when there's no proof to back it up. That's not what we had. I don't believe. I mean, at least not in my culture, the way it's explained to me, we weren't a people who lived on this idea of unprovable of an unprovable faith. I mean, the closest thing that we had to faith was the idea that we knew when we put a seed in the ground that that a plant would grow from that. But we didn't do that on blind faith. We saw evidence of it every single year. So it was a practice, not necessarily something that we thought that without, in the absence of prayer, that plant was still going to come up. So I don't know. You know, when we talk about whether we want to call it spirituality or religion, I think it's hard to have that same conversation within the context of what we see as the dominant religions of the world and the damage that they have done.
And then I would have to agree with John saying because that's exactly it. Like I know when he said that I don't know about everybody else's, you know, the indigenous philosophy, because a lot of them are kind of lost in between, either destroyed or distorted, right? So something they sit in between, and some of them are not. But the ones that you could reconstruct, for example, Nahuas, we didn't have gods. Mayas didn't have gods. And then Lakota, from my understanding, the way they describe the English translation, the Great Mystery, is a life force, which is how you would, and I don't even think it's like 100% complete way to say it, because you can't say it in English. You literally can't use a language conceptualized from somewhere else to describe something from somewhere else that, is just too different. Because in books it says the Maya gods, the Mexica god. It's like God's not even close to, because God's like this thing where it's a guy in the sky with a beard, and watching over you that has plans, based on the Bible. And what we had is a description of saying there's something in the cosmos running everything, and it must be inside different things, which, if you think about it, is a lot more similar to science saying there's atoms and everything's comprised of an atom, like literally. So when John's saying that, it falls in line with other indigenous people's beliefs. So you can't compare them, like he said. So if you're saying make a comparison of enriching lives, then obviously what we had before was, because whatever whatever, because like I said, the scientific critical thinking and the cosmovision was fused. So that's why we didn't have gods, because there's like a fusion of that, which in religion and science, like, and I'm talking about old world concepts, they're divided. They have nothing related. While ours was a little more fused, and the reason being was because it's all critical thinking, and so you can't compare them. But you could say whatever we had before was enriching our lives, because look at the progress we're making and achievements, and just the fact that we were able to build very large societies and make food and domesticate things. So yeah, but bringing up, like it was mentioned in South America, yeah, there's people not really being religious per se, but missionaries around the world are still bothering our people, still culturally, because they're still they're still going around. So when they come in with their religions, they're not enriching their lives, they're not moving them towards independence, they're destroying their lives, because on top of that, they're erasing whatever they even have left that they were able to survive from conquest.
Yeah, I mean, even some of the, this, I don't know, loose embrace, I guess, that or the tolerance, and I use that word because on purpose, because I don't think tolerance is in any way the same as respect, but the tolerance that some of these religious figures have had, including the Pope, for other views on, on spirituality or whatever, to me, still is condescending, and it still almost seems like a strategy to me, rather than a full acknowledgement of the ills of their own faith, and what that faith has done, which is blinded truth. So I think that's absolutely true. And again, to Illari's point, we were, in the closest translation to what we call that power would be the great natural power, and then we do say the great mystery, because we know that pursuing the full understanding of where that power comes from, where it dwells, how it works, is less important than understanding that power and how that power affects creation. I mean, and that power doesn't know good or evil. It just is. It's a power that can, it's a power that perhaps does give a life force to cancer cells and disease and virus. But a lot of that stuff is again a response to man's manipulation. So even when we can look at what we think is good for us or bad for us, it's not a good versus evil construct. And so when to go back to the original topic, I think the idea of eliminating, as our ancestors did, the idea of trying to, or embracing, I should say, this idea of good versus evil, right versus wrong, but really trying to understand the ebb and flow of nature and the tensions of nature, which is, again, you don't have a creative people or a critical thinking people if you don't have conflict. And that conflict is created in everything from weather and climate change that would exist naturally to disease, to drought, to any number of things that that affect the people. A growing population, or perhaps a population that becomes asymmetric somehow. So I mean, there's all kinds of things that tensions in nature. But the idea of not necessarily trying to characterize a good versus evil construct the way the religions of the world have done, I think is that's one of those things that I would like to advance forward, from my ancestors.
I'm glad you two said that, because that's true. And I've heard similar things from other Native people talking about what the belief systems, I guess, or spiritually African religions and faiths were a little different. A lot of them were. A number of them had all-powerful gods or goddesses or multiple gods or goddesses. So I think that just can also be said that we both have our uniqueness, though our situations now is so intertwined. And I believe it was the if I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Yoruba religion that did have a cosmology aspect to it, and more focusing on spirituality versus faith, trying to understand what the Earth is and what the universe is, versus looking to the sky, for a powerful being to save you. And I think these faiths of religion or different versions of spirituality are very important to look back upon for the both of us, because granted, like Illari said, a lot of them have been lost to history / colonizers burning scrolls and destroying our history. But whether you want to believe in a specific spiritual aspect or faith or religion of your ancestors' past or not, it does get you closer to your ancestors, because this is what a lot of them believe. This is how they acted day to day, in large part because of what they believed in. And it's weird when you think about that, because speaking for my folks, you have Malcolm X, Muslim, Martin Luther King, Christian, and these are two faiths that, at least where they grew up, they would not have become. They would not have become a Muslim or a Christian. And they were still.
Yeah, but that's saying that without knowing that. I mean, you don't really know. I mean, what I'll say about both Malcolm X and MLK is that they went beyond the limits of the religious doctrine that they perhaps had embraced in their life. I mean, you can listen to Martin Luther King and not be a Christian or embrace any religion and still find value in the words that he said, because they spoke the truth. They didn't just speak on belief. Now, the problem with a lot of this stuff is the inability for people to understand what a metaphor is. So when we have somebody interpret something that they learned from a native people, and all of a sudden they're plugging the word gods into our culture, and I'm always wary of when people use expressions like that when describing anybody's knowledge system. And I don't want to say belief system, because there's a big difference between beliefs and knowledge. Beliefs are what you're told. Knowledge is what you experience. Now, if you have been indoctrinated with a set of beliefs that doesn't allow you to embrace your experience and gain knowledge from your experience, because you've been clouded with some of these belief systems, or to deny what you're seeing or experiencing, or have to reframe everything that you experience to fit within a religious dogma, that's a huge problem, and I would say that's the problem that most people experience with the world. I think when we're talking about the wisdom of our ancestors, I'm not talking about spirituality. I'm not talking about beliefs. I'm talking about knowledge. I'm talking about the knowledge that they tried to impart and implant with us. And again, when you look at how stories were told and what the oral traditions were, the problem is so much of that stuff is being misinterpreted. So when we talk about a creation story, people want to automatically line it up with Genesis, or they want to line it up with some, some other belief system, not understanding that no, that story is not our creation history. It's a story that can teach you certain aspects or certain concepts. I mean, when we talk about Sky Woman coming through, and as she comes through, she grabs plants on her way down. To me, that story is more of a metaphor for childbirth, for birth, not necessarily the beginning of the world or the universe or the creation of Turtle Island or whatever else. I think there's stuff that gets misinterpreted in our culture, and then it gets turned into these these little religious parables that people try to. I literally had a white woman who wanted to do an analysis on the parallels between Haudenosaunee beliefs and Christianity. She went around and asked a few people, and she was really set on doing this. And she belonged to one of these stricter denominations, and she approached somebody that knew me, and he said, "Yeah, you probably don't want to do that." And he handed her my card. She started listening to my program a couple of weeks, and she got pissed. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, because I was like undermining everything that all our American heroes and founding fathers and a lot of these religious constructs and that kind of stuff. But the more she listened, and then she started questioning some things on my Facebook page and stuff like that. Now we're friends. And I'm not saying that I've, made her lose her religion, but she no longer is a part of that strict denomination that she once was. But now she understands the distinction between, the things that we talk about, that we, and the idea of the knowledge-based systems that we try to embrace versus a faith-based system. Because I think that's where this conversation of religion, gets so entangled. I think many indigenous cultures, develop stories and ways of communicating and spreading that knowledge. But I think that they've been interpreted, as paralleled faith-based systems of beliefs. And I'm not necessarily sure that that's true.
It can be a very dangerous concept if you get too lost in whether it's, I guess, original teaching of whatever spirituality, faith, whatever, and then what is this helping you personally, and like John, you said, living your day-to-day life kind of takes a back seat a lot of times with these religions and faiths, because you have to do everything the book says. If you're not doing it by the book exactly, you're failing. You're not a good person, all that stuff, and you kind of lose yourself as an individual, especially if you are Black or Native. When you're from the time you're born in this white society, you already have a very loose grasp of your individuality in the first place. So that just makes the problem worse. Looking at ancestors, and Tanja, you have ancestors, Jamaica, Germany, all over the place. When you look back at your own family and what you have learned from the areas that you lived in, and teachings from the past, from Black folks in that area, or just within your family, what have you learned and taken to heart?
First of all, on the religion discussion, one thing that even when I was in school in Germany, as I remember actually exactly the day that I was in school, and we were taught about how Christianity was spread, basically, from Byzantine throughout everywhere, and how bloody this experience was for everyone involved. I remember thinking as a kid, like, if you have to use a sword to convince people elsewhere that this is the kind and loving way to be, something is not right. And I mean, I was raised somewhat Christian in that context, and I was in a religious education class, and we were reading all of these writings about people elsewhere, but also people in Africa, people in South America, everywhere, and what the scholars at the time were saying about these people. And for me, it just then even became clear that the way that religion was spread was, an intentional part of the colonial project. And so it was not just like a happenstance thing. It was completely intentional to dehumanize. And so since then, I've just been, and that's not just elsewhere, it was also within Europe. So that was actually what I was going to contribute, which is that the Germanic religions that existed before, which, and pagan religions that were there, were similarly demonized and erased, and people were killed for the same reasons. So that's one thing that I can take from all over, is that this was a colonial project and still is a colonial project, and the things that stem from it, such as the outgrowths like homophobia and the patriarchy that was promoted through the guise of religion, or still continues to be promoted that way, has affected my family significantly. And so I've seen women in my immediate family really suffer under patriarchy and the idea of simultaneously being subservient, but also full workers in field work and in all these other ways. So I feel I don't want to make religion necessarily responsible solely as a mode of white supremacy, but that is one lesson that I've learned, is that patriarchy functions at the macro levels and in the daily lives and it has affected my family in the way that women have ground themselves really, really down physically and mentally and emotionally, and had untimely deaths for that reason. So one thing that I've decided is to eventually, once I get over this hump, try to break that cycle and not allow that to happen to me in that same way. I feel like I talked a really long time. Sorry.
It was good. I just don't need to apologize for the length. And I'm glad you brought that up about patriarchy. There's a article in the Constitution of the Mali, former Mali Empire, the Kurukanfuga, and Article 14 states, "Never offend women or mothers. Never offend women or mothers." And you look at today, there's a lot of black men offending women or mothers. And I look at how we used to be as a people, and what we are now, and I'm always try to be careful when I look at that and look at this now, because we are so colonized, and I'm speaking right now, I'm still knocking off colonization. So we have all this indoctrination and BS that has been banged into our heads. But I do look back and I go, man, there's a lot, and I emphasize that, a lot to take from our ancestors and their teachings and how they treated people, treated each other. I think one of the most tragic forms of irony is in the Iroquois Constitution. It says you're not supposed to go on to somebody else's land and take it, and that was edited very poorly to make the American Constitution, and of course America stole all the native land. But thinking positively, I do take a lot of pride in how a lot of my ancestors and leaders, philosophers, etc., acted and set a path and a kind of an unofficial doctrine, if you kind of add all the good stuff up, just to take from and put into your own life, and how to be a decent person, but also how to be a strong person, how to get yourself back up from troubles. And I'd say, personally, I take a lot of pride in that. But looking at, I put this on the table, looking at how society is now, and black community, native community are within this white society. How can we look back at our ancestors? And John, you alluded to kind of using the path that they had set for us without, in their minds, okay, we're setting a path for the future, but the path that they set for us to, one, learn from, but to put us in a position to liberate ourselves and get back to what we used to be.
Well, and you reminded me of a few things I wanted to mention along the way, and it fits in with what you're raising now, because the point is, we don't have a path going forward. We have a path to the point that we're at now. I mean, our ancestors did not, pave a road for us. They created a path that they were on, and that path has a direction. So that's part of it. But one of the things that I wanted to be careful because of some of the comments I made earlier. Look, we all have to do what we have to do to survive, and I know that generations of my ancestors had to do some things that compromised and maybe created some of that cognitive dissonance for them and for us today. I think, again, going back to try to parse the difference between what is the wisdom of our ancestors that we need to bring forward versus what is it that they did at the moment, because I think Tanja brought this up, and I think Illari as well. We know that we've been affected by circumstances that were certainly beyond our control, and the things that we've needed to do historically, generationally, to make sure that we retained some elements of that of what those who came before us did. Oftentimes, we can be confused about what were those practices, and a perfect example is how many people enlist in the armed forces because they're a third or fourth generation, Marine or Ranger or something like that. Those first Native people or Indigenous people who served in the armed forces for the very people who oppressed them did that for entirely different reasons than we're doing it today. And so I think we have to understand that what we do to survive in a given moment or in a given generation is not necessarily the wisdom that we want to pass down to the next generation. I think we want to pass on that surviving spirit, and if anything, the real knowledge that we need to be able to ascertain from those who came before us was how they managed to hang on to any of our identity in the wake of all of this unbelievable pressure to assimilate or to be victims of genocide. And I think that is to me the strongest thing that I get from my history and my culture, is that the fact that we can even have this conversation today says that enough generationally, each generation retained and promoted the sense of identity and the sense of indigeneity, or whatever you want to call it, that keeps this, decolonization conversation going. So, but look, I'm still gonna, get a paycheck. I'm still gonna, spend money in a store. I'm still gonna do some of the things that I'm still gonna put gasoline in my car, completely aware of where that fuel is coming from. So there are things that I'm going to do to get me to that next place. But I also want to do, with each day, I want to try to change the paradigm for what our lives are, even if I can only do it subtly and in small increments with the time that I have left.
That was beautifully put.
What are your two thoughts on hard act to follow there? That was, as Tanja said, very, very beautiful. But what are your two thoughts, Tanja and Illari, about how we can use our ancestors' teachings and some of the accomplishments and what they did in their lives and the communities that we had, all that type of stuff. How do you think we should, or your own personal self, put that into practice in today's society?
Well, I'll go back to critical thinking, because I don't, like, if you don't have that as an indigenous person, it's going to be very hard to make progress, and I think that's, like, the number one thing that you just have to instill at a young age, to be a critical thinker, because that's where you're going to develop philosophies. You're going to be able to analyze how to move towards liberation, because if critical thinking allows you not to be dependent, and, at the moment, unfortunately, like how John was saying, like, we got to go get gas from here, we got to go do that, we got to go buy from here. And that's unfortunately, a form of dependence that everybody has, including myself, because we haven't been able, not because we're not capable, but we haven't been able to develop our own systems where we have all the resources around us, but everybody hijacked them, and we're working the land, giving it, working our bodies and making profits for somebody else. And when there have been leaders that have tried to use whatever critical thinking to move beyond the steps, it's not easy. Like, let's say Hugo Chavez is a good example of an indigenous person, critical thinking liberation, by saying things like, we're going to join X amount of so-called Latin American countries under one coin of money, and we're going to create exchange systems between ourselves. So essentially what I'm saying is, if we start thinking that way, and even thinking as we're one people, regardless of whatever genocidal colonial label is put on us, if you start doing things like that, it'll only build up to independence, developing. If you're a critical thinker, you're going to be able to develop your own car, your own system, your own electricity. So, you're not dependent anymore. So I think that's what I could get from my ancestors. And then besides the survival spirit, that's what I try to apply to my life. But the reality is, everything's going to be in baby steps. I always think it's the younger people that are going to have to be developed into these type of individuals that think like that. I think, as far as myself, I think overall, in a contemporary sense, destroying the Hispanic and Latino labels on my people would be the number one priority. Because like all the other stuff I mentioned is mass scale. People that are like, you're going to need more than one leader, one, it's going to be like a confederation of some sort. So I think that there's going to be people like myself in this time that are going to just put seeds in to get rid of certain labels, and then later on I might, whatever I'm teaching, whatever I'm saying to anybody, that's just going to run off and eventually build these people that are, you know, true revolutionaries.
Yeah. Just to add to your critical thinking issue, I think the biggest thing that we need to do is encourage the critical thinking in our young people. I mean, and the whole creative spirit and you know, critical analysis and problem solving. You know, seeing even what these young people were doing after the Parkland shooting, I may not agree with everything that I heard those young people doing, but the blatant criticism that came from the right on these young people, and then the attacks that they had to withstand, to me that's just emblematic of what is so wrong with American society. I want to encourage young people, because you're absolutely right. We only have so much that we can accomplish, as adults. We really need to encourage and help foster that growth in the creative spirit amongst the next generation. So that's one of the things on that critical thinking path that I think not just applying it ourselves, but encouraging it amongst others.
I'm with that wholeheartedly, and especially with what you said about the Parkland situation. The ideology and the politics aside, the effort and the fearlessness of those kids, you can't argue with. Tanja, I guess you could finish the night up for us. What do you look at with our ancestors and the particular people or groups of people you look at as your ancestors to help your daily life currently, and looking at the Black community at large?
No pressure for finishing the night off, thanks. So one thing that I've been engaged in addition to, critical thinking is also something I've been working on with young people for a long time, and I think this is something that's very undervalued here and in other places as well, but there's a purposeful undervaluing of fostering young people's critical thinking to actually make them competitive on this imagined global market that seems to only value non-critical thinkers who can do this one thing. So that's my comment on that. But so one thing that I've been trying to do is actively retrace some of the activism and values and things that have already been done. And when I say ancestors, I don't necessarily just mean like pre-colonial. I mean people throughout history who have been that I'm sharing values with. And I think, yeah, maybe this is rambly, but reclaiming values that are outside of neoliberalism and thinking of everything as a marketplace, and kind of claiming values for myself that are humanizing and based on how I would like to envision the world and how I would like to raise my daughter. So those are things that I've been actively engaged in. So I've been thinking about what this looks like, what it means to look at people as people and not products. So if I do a favor for someone or I do something, am I expecting some sort of reciprocity that's direct, or am I just engaging in behavior that I think I should be engaging in because it's positive or is supportive, versus thinking of a product or like time wasted or I don't know. I found myself caught up in this in the same thinking that I like to critique, because our days are structured in a certain way oftentimes. If we have to work certain hours, or if we have to fulfill certain responsibilities and get gas and go to the store and do all of these things that our time becomes this marketplace value thing, and then people become the same thing. And so I'm actively trying to resist that and really consistently reshape how I think about my engagements with other people, how I engage with the world around me. And it's really hard because it's easy to get sucked into this really capitalist way of living, where everything really ends up being a product, and then you're the product as well. So that's just my micro level engagement, and then professionally I've been trying to publish and think about getting some histories into visibility that are going to support other people in reclaiming that stuff for themselves. So, yeah, very small steps.
Baby steps, exactly.
Exactly, baby.
What you said resonated with me when you were speaking on not just ancestors. You know, we think of during colonial times, or even back to like the 60s, 50s, and 60s, but going back further, when we were kings and queens, and from our side of the table, at least, goddesses and gods, and the belief systems that we had, and the morality was completely different. So that means a lot if we look back and look at how we used to act and what we used to do, how we used to treat other people, how we used to treat other brothers and sisters, and if we can take that into our lives today, as hard as that is, as you said, Tanja, because we live in this capitalistic society, a colonial society. But I think that definitely needed to be said. I'm glad you put it on the table. And I'm glad that I was able to share this space with all of you again tonight. And I hope to see you all back here soon. And we'll have a wonderful week.
I am so grateful
Thanks
for
having
all
us.
of you. Thank you.
Yes, it's great.
Thank you.
I really enjoy sharing this time with you guys. I really do.
Likewise.
Likewise, my brother. Peace, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
All right.
Good night.
Bye.